Okay, good morning. We're on another episode of To the Bone with Shelby Daly, and today's guest is Dave Gallegos, who's in New Mexico right now. So we bumped in on LinkedIn after I posted a few things, and he's been a great sounding board of educating me on what's going on currently in athletic training and helping me find answers to the questions I have about the profession. David's background is he's an active educator at Las Cruces School District. He's the deputy CEO at Southwest Sport and Spine. Previously, he was the vice president of the board of directors at NATA. Currently, he is the only AT at the APTA in the private practice of therapy administrators with his MDT certification. He currently is the District 7 rep for RMATA, and that includes Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. A few accomplishments from the very many. Has pushed for athletic training education in grade schools in New Mexico without having to obtain their educational degrees. And he's a co-founder of Innovate AT, which was established in 2016, and it's an educational pathway to entrepreneurship and business and athletic training. So, with all that experience, what is your favorite thing about what you do as an athletic trainer, David?
That's a good question. I mean, I could probably go on for days about that, but I'll make one clarification. Thank you for the awesome introduction, and Shelby, thank you for having me here. You said that I'm a sounding board for you, but I just like to clarify that you're also a sounding board for me. I think it's super important that people that have been in the profession a long time are listening to people that are newer to the profession and have new ideas and different perspectives. And so, for me to participate in this with you and just to be like a texting sounding board back and forth, I learned just as much as I hope you learned. So thank you for that. When I finished my time as an ATA vice president, which was last June, I also finished my time as district director. So currently, I am not the district director of RMATA. That's Valerie Herzog, but those two are in tandem. So right now, I'm involved with the NATA and other things, but not as the director. So, but that's an awesome introduction. Thank you very much, Shelby. My my favorite thing about athletic training. Um, well, I'm a teacher at heart. I didn't ever think I would really be in teaching. I didn't want to get a teaching degree. I ended up getting a teaching degree as a master's degree. And for me, healthcare, professional advocacy, athletic training, whatever you want to call it, is all fundamentally based on education. And I have no problem spending time teaching people the different perspectives that I have, and then obviously trying to learn. And so, to me, it's a nonstop um, billboard. Like whether I go into a business meeting or I go into an event, I meet with a parent, a kid, a coach. It's nonstop education, and yeah, it fires me up to be able to walk out of a room and say, okay, now they have a better perspective of what I'm hoping to understand athletic training is. So yeah, it just nonstop teaching, I think, is my passion.
Yeah. Well, so with your background in education, and that's a
Yeah.
big passion of yours, can you give us a little history of athletic training education and the domains?
Yeah, that's a that's a lot of work, right? So I'll give you just a little a little history. In 2018, the RMATA wanted to recognize Gary Del Forge, who was the program director at the University of Arizona. And the University of Arizona, along with Indiana, were the two programs in the country in the 70s and 80s that had graduate level education in athletic training. So, in other words, the first master's programs, right? And they were post professional masters. Um, and so, a lot of people that have then come on to be our NAT presidents, our KD presidents, maybe even a VOC president, I'm not sure, but significant leaders in the profession have come out of the University of Arizona. And Gary Delforge was getting older. He was retired. He was kind of unfortunately on the decline. And we wanted to recognize his impact in our district and within the nation. So in 2018, we put together a presentation that then was presented in 2019, and it included Gary Delforge, a tremendous leader, Bob Benke, who was in Indiana, which was the cohort, like the opposite of him, David Perrin, who was Virginia and then Utah, John Schrader, I think he was Indiana State, And those four were four of those were the first five professional education committee chairs. And what that really means is in those years, NATA encompassed Katie, right? The NATA encompassed the BOC. Those entities didn't exist in those years. That was all NATA. So NATA had an educational wing, had a certification credentialing wing, right? It had the entire thing, and now it's since split up into Katie, BOC, the foundation, NATA, right? We now call it Strategic Alliance, but at that time it was all under NATA. So we brought together people that were in what we now call Katie, and we brought together Lindsay McLean, who was the first AT that developed this credentialing exam. So we brought together pretty much the NATA, the BOC, and the Katie of the 70s and 80s. And we put them together into a room, and we had like I can't remember, it's maybe a 3-hour presentation. It is recorded, and it's on the ATA website if anybody wants to watch it. But that's where my passion really started to dive deep into the domains of athletic training and the history of AT education. One of the questions I've asked, I don't know, I would have to say 1,000 times, is how do you define athletic training? So I might say like, hey, Shelby, so how do you define athletic training? Right? And then I would ask somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. And I do that just because I try to get a perspective on what they see the profession's capabilities are and what they see maybe the limits and really just to see if there's a consistent definition. And over all those times, I did not find a consistent definition, at least a working definition, right? I mean, we might have like the Katie definition, you could look it up, or the NATA definition, you could look it up, but there wasn't a consistent practical definition that people would lean on. I mean, it went from like chaos management to, to athletic healthcare to team approach. I mean, there was like nobody. It was so crazy that nobody really said the same thing over and over and over. The only thing that they really did say was that it involved passion. So many times my sign-off signature on emails is AT Passion because that was probably the consistent thing that I found across most of those questions. But what blew my mind out of all this history education was I asked Gary Del Forge that in 2018 because he was just another person I needed to ask that question to, right? And he looked at me like I was crazy. And it was the first time that somebody told me, I cannot believe you're asking that question. This has been defined since the 70s. It's called the competencies in athletic training. We defined athletic training in the 70s with the first NATA competencies, which then the AMA recognized as a unique profession. Anything other than the first competencies is not the original definition of athletic training. And if you want the original definition, go study the competencies. So to me, it was a little bit of a slap in the face that I hadn't put those together. Like the competencies and AMA's recognition was the original definition. It was the definition that our profession agreed upon. It was the definition that we used to push legislative efforts and recognition. And over the years, we're now in the 5th edition of those competencies and the 8th edition of the BOC practice analysis and the 2020 or maybe even newer 2024 coming Katie standards, right? So we have all these variations of the original definition. And to my point is that I was asking these people, and it depended on if you spent more time with the BOC or more time with Katie or more time with NATA or more time with whatever, right? Or maybe you spent none of the time with that. You were just a practicing AT. And so you all had different definitions. And it was a little bit of an awakening for me that somebody could clearly say, it's been done, we've done it. You shouldn't ask again about what the definition is. It's already set. Now, what he did say is many of the things that I was bringing were just new names for it. So people would say, we should be called athletic therapists or we should be called whatever. He said, those are just names, but the definition behind that title is already set. And people just don't know that. So his big push was that we need to re-educate our membership, even re-educate our leadership, because the evolution of history happens, and it's happening so quickly now, especially post-pandemic, that things are changing. And if we're not aware of the history, it's really hard to set a vision. It's really hard to see how to go from the history to the vision because you can't bridge the gaps that are in between there. And when you bridge them without knowing the history or without the future either side of it, you just create confusion and stress within our profession. And so over the past many years, I've spent a lot of time on our domains. And the thing that, and John Schrader's been fundamental. He's a retired AT. like I said, from Indiana State. He now lives in Arizona. But in terms of like a mentor, like you're talking about, hopefully that I could be for you, he is for me a tremendous mentor. But one of the things that I did learn is that when our profession started, there were not athletic training classes like you took or like I took in college, right? I took sports medicine 190. I took all sorts of like AT type classes. Well, they didn't exist. So how do you create the first set of educational courses to create an athletic training degree that could sit for an exam where you had to take courses from other professions that already existed? So the initial establishment of our degree took courses from public health or personal wellness and public health. They took courses from emergency medicine, like EMT type stuff. They took courses from physical therapy, which is where we get a lot of our clinical diagnosis and rehab overlap. They took courses from primary care. They took internship experience from orthopedic surgeons, and then they took classes in business. And they put those classes together to create the athletic training profession. So those of you that are in MMA, and I saw you're into martial arts kind of AT coverage, I kind of think that the AT profession is like the first MMA degree, right? It's a mixed martial art. It's like a mixed degree of other professions that allows us to span a lot of areas that people don't recognize. So sometimes when I try to relay like, hey, you should not fight with whoever, primary care or physical therapy or EMTs about how you're going to handle an on-field. We have like the same DNA as a public health professional. We have the same DNA or some of the DNA of an EMT or some of the DNA of a physical therapist. Or, so we have these pieces in our history that we don't recognize. And now we just call them athletic training classes, therapeutic intervention, critical care, risk reduction and mitigation. But if we go back far enough, those are classes from other professions. So now when I look forward, when I see our domains, to me, it's the new version of the old titles of those classes. So like domain 1 in our risk mitigation and health and wellness is really our public health coursework. Domain 2 is really like our EMT coursework. Domain 3 is really like our PT and primary care coursework. Domain 4 is the PT, primary care, a little bit EMT. Domain 5, our healthcare admin, is really just our business coursework. And so we have then come all these years and then refunneled these specialties, if you would, or these practice domains into new names that fit within the athletic training kind of terminology. But it's really a history of our participation from those other degrees. So then when I think about it like that, I don't really have any problems when I walk into a room of orthopedic surgeons or primary care practitioners or physical therapists or EMTs, because I know inherently, and it gives me confidence to know that I have some of the same background that they have. And we're not as different as we think we are, right? There's a lot of overlap. And then it's not so much about comparing our overlap because it's kind of from the same tree. It's more about recognizing the differences that we bring that the other group doesn't bring. And so knowing our history and our education to that level has allowed me to advocate, I think, at least I think successfully, has allowed me to work with interprofessional practice situations with ease. It allows me to downturn or turn down like the stress of people overlapping in fields where if you're not careful, it creates like turf wars, right? But I don't really see that because I understand our profession well enough. And I think when we don't understand our profession to a significant level, and I really did not understand it to that level until I met with Gary Delforge and then started doing my research right over the last 6-7 years, it's been a game changer for me. So if you track that and you like that kind of educational history and how it impacts today, there's an article that John Schrader finalized, and it was initially written by those people that were in that presentation. And I believe the athletic therapy today, or athletic therapy, I don't know the exact title. It used to be called Athletic Therapy Today, but now it has a new title. But it's a journal that has the words athletic therapy in it. Is going to publish that paper. And it's a long paper, but it talks about the history of education from when it first started to like kind of where it is in the last 10 years or so. awesome one. And then I wrote an editorial in the NAT News that was called "How Do You Define Athletic Training?" And it's a little bit long, and I think maybe it was a little bit too long. So I don't know if enough people read it because people don't want to read 4 pages of, of information. They just want to get like the snippets you get out of it. But that's what I talked about a lot, and I think this topic is so important, just so important because that the inability for us to say what is athletic training. When I ask Shelby, when I ask David, when I ask John, when I ask Gary, none of them can say the same thing. Is fundamentally, I think, the struggles that we currently have as a profession, and the post-pandemic situation and the speed at which business and change is happening has just amplified that difference that I was finding before the pandemic. And I think if we can find time and spaces like this, so I appreciate you creating a space for people to think out loud and debate and discuss, and because we have to come to a new definition, an agreed upon new definition, in order for us to move forward as a unit. Otherwise, we will splinter, we'll create division, we'll create animosity and resentment, and I think it's only because we're not recognizing the change that's happening. We're just seeing the symptoms of it.
Yeah.
That's a big answer.
Well,
That's,
no, yeah. No, it's great. I guess, with the state of athletic training coming out of COVID, where we didn't do the in person clinical rotations or in class in person, is very different. I think there is a struggle right now with the newly certified athletic trainers of this isn't what our expectation of our profession is coming out. So I think there's a lot of tension on the education system right now of, well, what's not working now? And it's, I think it's getting those people more reps and more experience, and I'm sure they'll figure it out. But at the same time, I think it showed some of the holes of, I don't know if it's generational thing or it's just there's so much information, but how do you see education in the next 5 years? Are we going to have to revamp the curriculums, or how are you going to fit everything in when it doesn't seem like some of the skills are actually being taken care of, like, taping. Being out here in Pennsylvania, there I would say there's an athletic training shortage, and I come out and I do taping and all the athletes are like, that's what it's supposed to feel like. Like, it's that's the bread and butter of athletic training is taping. That's what sets us apart from a lot of the other healthcare providers. And some people are just not carrying it out super great, or executing the little things of athletic training that makes us different. So I don't know. I'm not blaming any programs. I'm not blaming any students, but I
sure.
think there's some holes that have popped up.
Hmm.
How do you think it's going to be navigated in the next few years?
Yeah, I love the term you said, they need more reps, right? So I think you're correct. My daughter was a sophomore and junior in high school over COVID. And I remember just being kind of just shocked when she told me her senior year in soccer season, "Hey, Dad, the last time I had a full season was my freshman year." And I was like, my God, that's horrible, right? It's horrible. And so then she wanted to go to college, and we had the option of staying in New Mexico or going to Arizona. She had two full rides for those things. And secretly, I was hoping for Arizona because I wanted her to experience what I think she missed in high school, right? You need to get out. You need to have fun. You need to get in trouble. You need to get your tattoo. You need to get whatever you're going to do, right? Like you need to live. And she did that. Last second, she went to Arizona 3 semesters. Came back here because it made a lot more sense when she switched her degrees. But for that period of time of going to Arizona, she caught up. I think she caught up to the experience of what it's like to be a young person, right? And kind of
Yeah.
live on the edge and be a rebel. And I think that's kind of what you're saying in these programs, that people missed experiences that people before them and maybe people after them have. And that is creating a definite tension. It's also, I cannot agree more that it's identified the holes in our education. It identified the holes in our onboarding of professional ATs. It's identified the holes in our professional expectations. It's highlighted the importance of work-life balance. It's highlighted the importance of keeping stress low, like not always working in a situation where you're under stress all the time, right? So So there are what we used to think was a very tight fabric, and even though we didn't define it well, we still had a relatively consistent idea of where we were going. And now it's like, right, blows up. What are we doing now? And I do think that in the next, I don't know how long it's going to take because things take a while, but I think on the immediate horizon, we need to recognize that the definition of AT is evolving faster, and the practice of AT is probably even evolving faster than the educational programs are keeping up with. We have 30 plus practice settings now. And
Mm-hmm.
I was the board liaison for COPA, which is the Council on Practice Advancement, which was the group that tried to recognize all this. Well, we really only had 10 different settings recognized in that council, but there's 30 out there, right? And so those 30 are progressing and marching forward and changing the profession. And this COPA, which is a larger group that's trying to support them, is behind them. And COPA is even ahead of like the educational pathways, right? So like the profession is changing quicker than we can keep up with right now. And so I do think what education looks like in the future is going to change. I, I think with the invention of technology and social media, democratization of a lot of things is happening. Like as an educator, I no longer have all the information. Kids can go to Wikipedia, they can go to ChatGPT, they can go anywhere they want, and then get the same answer that I could give them. So then, what becomes my value as a teacher when the student can get the information on their own? Right? What becomes the value of a healthcare provider when they can go to WebMD or go to whatever Teladoc or whatever and get the stuff without me? What becomes the value of the NATA or even Katie or the VOC in the leadership when leadership is now happening at the grassroots level? So all of these systems that were traditionally in place have now been fast forward into like a democratization where the power is shifting from what we used to call like the top or the leadership to
Mm-hmm.
the grassroots person. So I think that what's going to end up happening is we're going to recognize that. We're not going to fight with it as much. Like right now, I think that's where you get a lot of the fight. Like, it's like, hey, this is what we should do, but this is what I want to do, and why can't we get together? And you're not supporting me, and you're not following me, and we get this whole argument that happens. And I think it's because we need to recognize the shift needs to occur in how we lead, how we
Mm-hmm.
collect data, how we represent people, our return on investment for people. And regardless of what you're in, whether it's your employer or your NATA or whatever, the return on investment of being connected to something has to be a lot more obvious and greater because
Mm-hmm.
people, students, are no longer students; they're consumers, right? So
Yep.
AT students are consumers. So they're making, consumer decisions. Should I involve here? Should I volunteer? Should I pay for this? Should I follow what you tell me to follow? Or should I
Yeah.
do what I think is best? And the old model of this is where we're going, everybody get in line and follow, right? I became an ATA member. I've been a member for whatever, 27 years now because somebody told me I should. I don't think
Yeah.
it's
The
necessarily
loyalty
like that
model.
anymore. Yeah, it's a loyalty, and that's right. It's that loyalty, and it's also the recognition that the power was here, and they had the vision, and they had whatever the decisions and the information that I didn't have. So I should just go with them because over time
Yeah.
I will figure it out, right? And I think that kind of thing is being challenged because they're saying, "Oh, well, I see where you're going. Maybe I see where you're going. Maybe not. Maybe they're not that in tune with it." But they're like, "That's not necessarily what I'm looking for." So as a consumer, I'm going to shift my energy, my resources, and do whatever. That change is where we're struggling right now. And I'm not just talking NATA, just talking the profession in general. And and we need to recognize that. So like now it becomes a lot more about business, and you talk about domain five and like return on investment and business skills and strategy and outcomes and all these things that business would normally talk about. That's how the person, the student, looks at things now because they're a consumer. Consumers look at if I pay
Yeah.
this much, what do I get back for it? Right? What's my value of being part of this? And in the past, we were not consumers, we were students. We were like being molded into a situation that just fit, and that doesn't exist. So I don't. I would just say in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to recognize that at a greater level. We're probably going to lean on people that are outside of traditional levels of leadership and say, okay, what do you think? What would be valuable to you? use situations like maybe like this as what we used to call NATA member surveys. Like we send out member surveys, respond, right? Now this may be like a member survey, and we may follow it up with AI assessment and say, okay, here, ChatGPT, take this podcast, tell me what the top 5 difficulties in the profession are, right? Based on everything that we said for the last 5 hours or hour or whatever we spend on this call, like, utilizing technology to identify and pull out things that we would normally not pay attention to. So I hope a lot of people listen to your podcast, whether they like what you say or not, because because it's important to recognize that shift, right? And the shift is not going to be comfortable. It's obviously not comfortable, right? This is why
Yeah.
there's strain. It's not comfortable, but it's happening, and you're not going to stop it. So you need to get on it and figure out how to ride it. So
Yeah. Well, and I think the consumer aspect of the newly certified athletic trainers is a great observation. And I think even the transfer of information is so much quicker. And that's where I'm seeing some problems is it's one-way communication. Some, you know, because we can direct message now, send the email, text message, the consumer needs that instant communication, and I don't think that's happening across the platforms. It's happening or behind the scenes, and I think that's where some of the tensions are coming from. Is I think a lot of new young professionals still don't really understand how NATA is supposed to work, or the BOC or Katie, that strategic alliance. You know, well, I think they came together in 2017, made some definitions, and then it seemed kind of like they pieced out and went and did their own things. So I think that's where the confusion is there's not one unified association to answer all the questions because it's all interconnected, and nobody, I feel like, is communicating super effectively or giving updates regularly. I mean, yeah, month or quarterly is great, but we have to make decisions quickly in our clinics. Not that they could be
mhm.
life and death, but it is something. Hey, I need to figure this out within 24 hours, like COVID.
Mhm.
Like, what's the new standard? How can we better this? I need help
Yeah,
with guidance. It's not we're sending information through the mail, through the magazines, which, or the journals or something, where it wasn't as regularly updated and had the ability to. So I think those are some of the things that aren't being taken advantage by athletic training. And obviously with
yeah.
medicine, you have to be careful and make sure that it's vetted and it's peer reviewed and EBP and all these different things. But I don't think we're taking advantage of that at the same time.
Yeah, those are good points. The speed of information is just ridiculous, right? Like, I mean, yeah, you can do you can get your resume right now and say, "Hey, ChatGPT, I'm just gonna." I love AI, so I'll talk about it a little bit. But I'll put my resume in there, and in 5 seconds, rebuild my resume so it looks like I should be the perfect candidate for this podcast. And then I can send that resume into Shelby, and she'll definitely pick me because now I'm like at the top of her, keyword list, right? I mean, the stuff happens so fast like that. Whereas that would have taken me previously research. What is Shelby interested in? Typing it up, Word document, somebody editing, proofreading out. That happens in 5 seconds now. And
Yeah.
so you're right. I think one of the things that I saw the NATA doing, and I think they're still doing, and they're I think doing a good job, is that they're remodeling the way that our website is, as our hub is being used. So traditionally,
Mm-hmm.
everything went to the website, and if you weren't a member, you couldn't get in, right? And you couldn't get to resources, and which is probably accurate, and it should be because regardless if people want to be members or not members, are getting the benefits of membership, right? And we can talk about that separately. But the NATA website was very cumbersome, thick, big, hard to find stuff, right? But now they've come up with like AT for me or at your own risk, and all these outwardly facing websites that ATs themselves can go to get information that their members are not members, or the public can go to, and other places can go to. So the NATA has put initiatives in to say, okay, our traditional digital resource center is too slow, too cumbersome, not responsive enough, right? We need to do more. So they're creating public facing entity websites that are connected to NATA and the backside. They're obviously they started like the quarterly, presidential stuff, but the direction is where you're talking about. It's just that I think to move, a 56,000 person organization, and we're talking, or maybe even more now, but we're talking all certifieds, to move an organization is definitely not as fast as you and I move, right? And so when we need information, I need it yesterday. Like I don't even like I tried to get a couple pieces of information for today's call, right? And I didn't go to the NATA. Unfortunately, I didn't go to the NATA website or the KD website or the BOC website to get them. I called friends. I said, "Hey, do you have this? Yes. Can you forward it?" Boom, boom, boom. So I got this information that normally would be required. You'd be required to be a member to get to the firewalls to get that information, right? Like I got it just by friends. And so that's where we get into
Yeah.
this whole issue. Like, do I have to be a member? Do I have to be, I can get this in lots of different ways and I can get it quicker, right? I don't have to spend 30 minutes on the site trying to find it. One text message to a friend, it comes
Hmm.
to my inbox. I'm done, right? So like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the struggle. That is the struggle. But I do think that the NATA has recognized that and the KD and the BOC. It's just, the process of evolution as you become bigger is slower, and the process
Hmm.
of evolution on the individual level is so fast. And
Yeah.
yeah, we just need to be better at that, right? We just need to be better, better on both sides. I recognize that top ship is can't just spin on 360 access, right? But also the top ship needs to recognize like they need stuff much quicker, much faster, much. Like we need apps on our phones that have all these things that you want on demand. We need, like clinical decision support that walk you through our like position statements, so that when you're taking care of your exertional heat illness, you're actually doing the right things because this app is guiding you to make sure that you didn't forget a step. I mean, you have all these things that can make the information we have faster. And I think as
Hmm.
we engage in technology more, that speed will increase, right? But in our current
Yeah.
model, it's slower than we both want.
Yeah. Well, and going into like continuing education or, the position statements and, you know, the quickness and the updating of data, I think is a big thing too. Or just, we have the ability to postmark if it's been checked or not, or, all that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think those are some interesting things that aren't necessarily happening on some of these platforms that athletic trainers are supposed to utilize. I think last week I had posted about the position statements and kind of that they're a little bit, dated. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think they're being reviewed, but there's just no evidence that it is, and if that is really the most up to date. And I mean, it was a surprise that going through the domains, since they put the different position statements under each domain, domain 5 only has one publication. And as we are learning that domain 5 is very encompassing of everything else we are supposed to do as athletic trainers, do we think that domain 5 is one of the missing pieces due to not enough, publications or these backings from our organizations that it is important? What are your thoughts
Yeah,
on that?
yeah. Well, I do think it makes sense that like our position statements are reviewed annually or biannually or whatever the current recommendation is, like across healthcare in general, and saying, hey, whatever that period of time is, we've updated ours every so many years like that, and we have a stamp on it that says that, edited, updated on. I think that stuff would be valuable. I think that's valuable not only for us, but it's also valuable for legal reasons, right? You get yourself in a bind, and somebody's going to use a tool to measure whether or not you're up to date or not up to date. You want that document and your actions to be considered up to date. And is
Yeah.
something that was written in 2011 considered up to date? I don't even know, right? My thought would be no, because
Yeah.
that's a long time ago. My thought is that pretty much everything post COVID is needs to be revamped because,
Yeah.
um, and I think almost I even think like a domain 5 degree like healthcare administration. If you got it in 2019 and you were in college 2014 to 2019 or whatever that would have been, it's not the same education as you're getting 2024. The world has changed so much that the models have changed so much, the information has changed so much that the same degree is probably has a different value pre and post COVID. So I've said, well, I'm glad I never got my healthcare admin degree before COVID because I should probably now get it afterwards because everything is changing, right? So I understand your point. I totally understand your point. And one thing that I can say is an upcoming themed issue of the Journal of Athletic Training is on health information technology and healthcare economics. And so I think it was maybe in 2018-ish, I don't remember the exact year, but um, the foundation came up with a research agenda, right? And I think it included 5 different topics, most of them in domain 5. I think there was
Hmm.
like a domain 1, and the other ones were maybe domain 5, on things that we need to address as a profession moving forward. And so this journal themed issue is actually a reference to 2 of those 5 sections. And so myself
Okay.
and Dr. Lee were asked to write the open editorial to this themed journal on the impact of healthcare economics and ROIs on what ATs can and do. And so I'm excited,
Hmm.
right? But like to your point, that research agenda came out in, let's say, 2018. I don't remember the exact year. But now in 2024 or 2025 is when the journal comes out. So that's a 7 year, that's like a 6 or 7 year gap in time between we say this is important to when it comes out, right? And
Yeah.
and at that time you could have 2 jobs, 2 different jobs by 7 years, right? And so you're trying to get that
Yep.
information quicker. Yeah. So some of those things are much slower than we want. One of the things that I think
Hmm.
is fast, is super fast, and I'm glad the NATA did do this. Um, all of the research that ATs do, and I'm sure you're doing some as part of your doctorate, right? You're doing some, and you're going to end up with a poster presentation probably at some point on your capstone. Well, they put those poster presentations at the entrance of the general hall for the NATA session. So if you wanted to go to the keynote, you wanted to go to the presidential speeches, you wanted to go to anything of the big, you had to walk through a tunnel of these poster presentations. And I was so happy that they did that because the posters are the cutting edge information, not necessarily what's in the journal. The journal is like the
Hmm.
summation of those efforts, right? But if you want to know what's happening today in Shelby's world, what is she working on, what's important to her today, that's the poster. And so I'm glad that they didn't have those in the back rooms where they used to be for many years. They used to be like you had to go find those things, right? Now they're like right next to the exhibit hall and right next to the general session because that's critical data. That's fast data. So people that go to those NHA conventions, I hope they spend time recognizing that that stuff has been placed there on purpose so that we can see that ATs are leading the discussions and it's right there for you to read. And they stand right next to the posters and answer your questions and do all that stuff, right? It's awesome. So I spent plenty of time. I spent hours, I think, in those poster presentations this year, primarily because they were easy for me to get to. I didn't have to go find them. So every time I went to a
Yeah.
meeting or went to the exhibit hall, oh, I stopped and check a new poster out, right? Like that's fast data. So I hope people attend the
Yeah.
meetings and I hope they pay attention to that.
Well, and I think that's interesting. Obviously we have a wide variety of athletic trainers who are going through the programs, or students, I guess, not
Mm-hmm.
certified yet, or if they're in a doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean. Is
I got you.
that sometimes we get so buried into what we perceive as the problem. Sometimes a new person entering the profession, they might be still learning everything, but sometimes they have that outside perspective of, well, but why are you doing that? Maybe that's the problem, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
mile away from where we're concentrating on. So I think that's where it's interesting. Is I think sometimes we don't take into account the new athletic trainers entering the profession, and they've kind of already identified
Yeah.
some of the difficulties or problems, but we're trying to still solve those problems that were 5 years ago that may not be
Mm-hmm.
as relevant as today. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
can't be chasing our tail all the time, but I do think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, there's 2 things that come to my mind when you say that. Um, we used to get a bachelor's degree in athletic training, and then many people, the vast majority of ATs have graduate degrees, and many times those graduate degrees were so that they could get into other jobs, right? Like, so you got a teaching degree so you could work in a public school, or you got a master's degree so you could work at the college, or you got, I mean, like they had these little pathways, right? Well, it's flipped now. So students are going to come in with degrees in other fields. They're not necessarily all going to come in with a kinesiology pre-athletic training, physical therapy, like healthcare type pre-degree. They may come in with business. They may come in with public health. They may come in with psychology. They may come in. And so they're going to bring a perspective to the profession of AT education that a previous student didn't bring because they didn't bring that background. They brought zero background, right? They were like formulated there, and then they took that somewhere. Now they're bringing information in and then filtering the new information of AT education through something they already learned. So I think, to your point, recognizing like the insights the new student brings is important. They're also a little older, right? They're also a couple years older because they already have their bachelor's degree. So they're a little more life experienced, a little more educated, a little more whatever, right? And it's going to be important that we recognize that. So thanks for bringing that forward, because that will be an important thing. Yeah. And anyway,
Yeah.
so the second part, I kind of covered it, but yeah, that's important.
Yeah. And like we had talked about before, I mean, this is where it's going to be an interesting dynamic in the next few years with the transition to masters is people, a more mature, more sophisticated, I don't know what the correct word would be for the a little bit older athletic
Mm-hmm.
training student going into the masters. But, talking about COVID, where do you see the role of continuing education and being able to direct athletic training? And should there be some sort of path of how you pick continuing education? I think with the younger athletic trainers that we are used to, they're still trying to kind of create a skill set to be able to sell themselves for a job, by doing the manual therapies. I want to be really good at, getting that knot out. I don't know what it is
Mm-hmm.
these days that people are really concentrating on, that ACL rehabilitation. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to be super good at that because I'm going to see that a lot. How do you see with the way that athletic training is going, where should some of the concentration go in continuing education, and what is the role in continuing education in athletic training?
Yeah, that's a really good one, and that starts to get into like our a little bit of a crosswalk between the BOC for your certification maintenance, as well as NHA for the coursework they develop, for the professional development committee, and the NATA New Educate site. But I think the BOC has done a good job formulating a continuous professional certification. And that kind of blew up initially. It stressed people out because they thought, oh, we're going to have to retake an exam. We're going to have to do something crazy. But really, it's a fancy way of saying that you need to assess yourself against your professional standards and identify which of those standards are lower than others, and then choose to go after continuing education that drives those standards. So instead of you just saying, I need to get 25 CEUs this year, and you just go to whatever classes and you get 25 and you check off the 25 box, they're now saying, I need to get 25 in domain one, right? Because my domain 2 through 5 are strong, my domain one's horrible. Let's just pretend.
Mm-hmm.
I need to spend 25 there. So I think the BOC has established a framework to recognize that pretty well. Um, so that's going to be important. The other thing that I think is super important is we, as a profession in general, in the past, and maybe even still moving forward, love credentials. Like, how many letters can I get after my name, right?
Don't look at
and
my LinkedIn.
right. It's like 3 lines. And I have some credentials too, right? I don't have them all listed on my stuff, but sometimes I wonder, should I not put anything on there? Should I just put ATC? Or should I put, like PES, CERT MDT, like all these other things that are behind there that I've spent time in? And like the MDT one that you referenced is one that I think is of significant value. But there's some other ones that I have that I think I could have done with or without, right? They look cool on a presentation or whatever, PowerPoint slide. But I think that what's happening is we're looking for other credentials that business recognizes. Like a job employer says, oh, do you do dry needling? Do you do cupping? Do you do scraping? Do you do,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, do you do manual therapy? And so in order to get your foot in the door, you're looking for business valued letters. But if we're also trying to drive our profession so that people recognize ATC as the value, not ATC MDT as the value, but ATC as the value, should we spend more time creating credentials by our main practice domains? So could we have ATC, and I'm just going to pretend I don't know what it would be called, but ATC certified 1, meaning domain 1, certified 2, certified 3, like certified 4 or 5. I don't know. I'm just pretending, right? But some way
Yeah.
where ATs would recognize the inherent value of the 5 different practice domains and leverage those practice domains to the public. So if I wanted to be a healthcare admin leader right now, most likely, if I was going somewhere else, I would have to have an MBA or a master's in healthcare administration. So my credentials would be MBA ATC or MHA
Hmm.
ATC, right? And then it could get my foot in the door because that entity would recognize the MBA or the MHA, and then I'd be bringing the ATC with it. And I'm wondering if we would end up saying ATC and then whatever the credentials are for domain 5. And then it would be our responsibility over time to show businesses that we have a healthcare admin focus specialty, advanced specialty in, if we want to call it like athletic healthcare or whatever, and we bring something that an MBA or MHA cannot bring, right? They can't have that because they don't have that ability to practice in the model that we're talking about. And so
Hmm.
could we then drive our continuous specialties and certifications and CEUs in ways that emphasize the strengths that we, I think, sometimes are missing, right? And so when I think that if people understood that those 5 domains are fundamentally, if you go back far enough, specialties in different fields, then if you
Hmm.
went forward and said, I want a specialty in that field, like instead of me going to get a public health degree, I would be a domain 1 specialist. Instead of me going to get a healthcare admin
Yeah.
degree, I'd be a domain 5 specialist. And we're slowly going that way. I mean, the like Katie has some of our residencies and fellowships somewhat aligned to our domains, but not exactly. So we're kind of on that path, but like an example, orthopedic specialty that we have out right now, I love it, but it's mainly geared towards people that want to work in the physician practice setting. It's not geared towards people that want orthopedic
Yeah.
specialty, right? Like orthopedic specialty to me would mean that when I work in a high school, it's still valuable to me. Or if I work in an occupational setting, it's still valuable to me because I'm still working with orthopedic type conditions. But that orthopedic specialty is really a setting specialty, right? Not a like a body part specialty. And so, but I think
Yeah.
had we maybe had that as a second tier, and of course now the VOC, Katie may get upset with me, or NATA, because I'm talking a lot of different strategy that we're currently using. But if we had the ATC here, and then our domain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the next level, and then above
Yeah.
that, a specialty within that space. So maybe we would have like domain 3 or 4 for clinical evaluation and therapeutic interventions as a specialty, and then above that would be a physician practice specialty. But the
Yeah.
physician practice specialty is currently here, and if we're not careful, then we're going to have 30 of those things because we're in 30
Hmm.
different settings. Where I think we should have
Yeah.
5 first, because those are the 5 pieces that we function as. Recognize
Yeah.
and use them to teach our own profession to a certain extent.
Hmm.
You can be a specialty in that area without needing those extra credentials that people think are awesome. And you get those on the second level, right? And we're not going to stop all that because that's business and people are good at marketing and anything that's new and sexy, everybody wants, right? So, and athletes want it because they make a lot of money and whatever's the new cutting edge thing, that whatever sells it the best, looks the best, is gonna be sold. We're never going to
Yeah.
stop that model.
That's the free market.
It's a free market, right? We're not going to stop that.
Yeah.
But I do think that we could formulate a little tighter the way that we use CEUs to drive the recognition of our own value
Yeah.
versus saying you have to go somewhere else for something else.
Yeah. Well, I was looking at Point Loma's program this last week, and I was actually surprised that they have concentrations in their athletic training programs of anatomy education, biomechanics, and sports performance. Do you see that as a way in the programs to maybe do a concentration more
Mm-hmm.
in these different domains? So you come out with your master's with a concentration in, you know, the emergent care or whatever, or do you feel like that's going to
Yes.
corner a lot of students?
I think the answer is yes to both of those. But I do think that obviously as a shift to a master's profession, right? Entry level masters or professional masters is better termed, is going to filter down the applicants. right? There's less applicants because now you have to get through a bachelor's to get there. It's
Yeah.
also going to filter down the programs that are maybe struggling for either outcome measures or struggling for volume of students. And so we're going to continue to filter down and unfortunately lose programs. And that's a big issue right now. That people are like, we used to have whatever 400 programs. Now we have 300 programs. What's happening, right? Well, what's happening is the programs that aren't able to keep up with your ROI, your specialties, and draw in those people and draw in the support from administration and draw in the faculty are not going to be able to survive, right? And I hate to say that because
Hmm.
I love the profession and I don't want any programs to struggle, but that's the free market we're talking about. As people
Yeah.
start to become consumers and you're looking at a master's degree and the cost of a master's degree on top of the cost of a bachelor's, you're going to start to say, okay, if I go here, what do I get to do when I'm done? If I go here, what do I get to do when I'm done, right? And so the idea of specialties, I think, will happen. Just like if you're going to go to medical school, and you go through and you finish your general medical degree, and now it's time for your residencies. You go after residencies that have specialties. You don't just
Yeah.
apply for a residency that's closest to you, right?
Hmm.
You don't say, oh, the one down the street's the one I'm going to go to because it's close. You say, I want to work in ortho or OBGYN or whatever, so I'm going to go towards this
Yeah.
focus. I think that's going to happen to ATs in the future, where you have the AT, like primary care education is our base, but programs will start to have residencies or fellowships connected to them that then drive those
Hmm.
specialties. And then people like yourself or myself as students would then pick one of those based on the specialty they want. Sometimes they will pick based on money because it's too expensive to go somewhere, so they will go to the closest one to them. But those that have
Yeah.
the ability to pick will go towards the one that has a specialty that they want. And if we have specialties that support our AT education, and I'm just saying
Hmm.
specialties by domain, but I mean, if it supports our AT education, I think we become stronger. If we have specialties that
Yeah.
are in those very extraneous situations of what you might work in, I think we may weaken our foundation. So
Yeah.
one of my big pushes is like, how do you create? We can't go after 30 specialties because we have 30 practice settings. And next year when we have
Hmm.
35, we can't go after 35 specialties. I mean, like we're chasing our tail, right? We should be
Yeah.
leading versus chasing. So I think we bring it back down and say, look, NAT, look, 56,000 ATs. This is what we provide. If you want to do something over
Hmm.
here, go for it. We love you. Do it. Share it. Show us how awesome it is. But we're going to be here because we can't be here,
Yeah.
here, 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 here. And as soon as we try to be everything to
Yeah.
everybody, we're nothing to nobody. So
Yeah.
we need to bring it down and say, this is who we are. This is our definition of athletic training. This is our core
Hmm.
skill sets. This is our domains. Let's teach on them. This is our whatever. And then we promote you in doing what you want to do with that degree. We're not going to limit you, but we may not necessarily track you and provide all the support you feel you should get because we can't do that for everybody.
Yeah. Well, and I think that will provide a better foothold for these different doctorate programs. I mean, my impression of doctorate program was, oh, I'm going to go do research, clinical research because I want to go work in, education. That was always my perception of doctorate and athletic training was, oh, I just want to go teach at the master's levels. But with Florida International University with their DAT, they're going into that domain 5 of the entrepreneurship, leadership, and globalization. And I mean, I think that would be a great pathway of, in the masters, you kind of get a foothold with one of the domains. And then once you get experience and you figure out, this other domain would really give me a great foothold to achieve A, B, and C, that gives you better directions of the doctorate programs, where I think that a lot of the doctorates are kind of doing the same thing. Obviously, they have different market tactics and all
Yep.
that stuff, but I think that's kind of the evolution of how you do it is you can go and attack a domain rather than kind of a
Mm-hmm.
broad general, yeah, we're just going to do research on manual therapy or something, which is still a domain,
Yes.
but if that
Yeah.
makes sense more.
Yes, I do. I do. And if that manual therapy is a specialty, that's great. All I'm saying is make sure, like we could make sure as a professional or as students that they recognize that's domain 4, right? So
Yeah.
you're getting a domain 4 specialty. But if we
Hmm.
just keep tying it back to who we are, and recognizing who we are and valuing who we are and all this like internal value, then it's easier to have the external value. When you come out of
Yeah.
something that maybe you don't have internal value to, your initial thought is it's not strong enough. I need to do something else. When you come out with
Yeah.
something that says I have internal value, then it's much easier to bump against those resistance points and overcome so that you can get to the point where you want to go. Yeah, so that's important.
Yeah.
And you make a really good point. I think we talked about Gary Del Forge and like Arizona, Indiana in the beginning, right? But
Hmm.
or maybe it was Indiana. I'm going to draw. They're going to hate me, but it's either Indiana or Indiana State that has the other masters. Let me think on that.
Should I just beep it out like a swear word
No,
so
it's
you don't
Indiana
get in
State.
trouble?
Indiana State. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's Indiana State had that original masters with U of A. Yeah, I mean that's like fighting words, right? That's like saying enemy machine. They probably hate me for that. But the what was a bachelor's, and then we had these master's programs, so valuable, and people came out of the Indiana programs strong, just like Arizona. That has now shifted from bachelor's to master's to doctorate. Oh,
Hmm.
we just kind of pushed it up, right? So the
Yeah.
DATs are going to become the U of A's in the Indiana states, right?
Yeah.
And years from now, people that have come out of those DATs are probably going to be strong leaders because they're going to have advanced thinking, more critical recognition of the profession, more
Hmm.
time in the profession, and it's going to be easier for them to advocate. So I think that's
Yeah.
why you're seeing like the emphasis in the DAT, and people want it, right? They want to
Hmm.
know, they want to have more value in their education. They want to know how to articulate it better. They want to know how to apply it better. They know that their undergraduate or now a graduate degree is valuable. They're just
Yeah.
looking for how do I demonstrate that? What's the business model? If I say I'm a doctorate, now I get into a door that I didn't get into with a master's, right? It's all based on that kind of free market model. But
Yeah.
but I do think that what we initially had is now, I don't want to say repackaged, but reinvented and revamped and improved into the master's and the doctorate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that we're looking at more education. Do you think there should be a reverse of creating a step below the master's, of recreating some sort of stepping stone in the bachelor's level of education to
Yeah,
help
that's a
direct
good question.
people?
That's a really good question. That's really so. My son is a junior and he wants to go into athletic training, which is
Yeah.
exciting. It's also kind of scary because we're in a position of transition, right? So how
Yeah.
do I help him navigate this? And am I telling him you need to get in all the way through your DAT, right? So you need to donate the next 7, 8 years of your life, right? Um,
Yeah.
and what undergraduate degree should he get?
Yeah.
And I am leaning towards a degree that drives something like a public health degree or a healthcare
Hmm.
admin degree or a bachelor's in physical therapy assistant degree or some sort of degree that gives you the information you need to get into your athletic training degree, but at the same
Yeah.
time supports you on the way out. And it's
Yeah.
funny that all the degrees that I've kind of looked at are really, if I go back far enough, the degrees that we were created from.
Yeah.
Like the only one that maybe is like newer evolutions is I thought maybe healthcare informatics or data science or
Yeah.
something like that
Sports
because
science.
yeah, because we're also going into a technology world, right? So maybe
Hmm.
like a computer science degree or business computer
Yeah.
science or something like that may be valuable because of the evolution of the world. But in general, what it seems to be most valuable is something in one of those five. And unfortunately for
Yeah.
me, kinesiology doesn't seem to be that valuable unless it has some tight specialty that's going to have ROI. If it's a degree
Hmm.
that it just allows me to get into athletic training, then I'm not that impressed. I'd rather have a different
Yeah.
degree and take a few side prerequisites and then get in and have actually two degrees, not one degree
Yeah.
that let me get the other degree.
Well, I think that's the biggest gap after this evolutionary step that we took is I think we have some very good high school sports medicine classes. I've, that's where a lot of people get the inspiration to become an athletic trainer, is because they were helping on the sideline while they're in high school. But now that we've kind of eliminated that bachelor's route and now it's the general kinesiology or something to that fact, I feel like we're going to kind of lose people unless they are 110% passionate about being an athletic trainer and know it in their heart. I think we're going to lose people along the way in that 4-year gap between the high school and master's. So I think we do need to take a hard look of reestablishing that, because that is quite a commitment to have to do 4 years to get into an athletic training program, and it's not very well directed. Obviously, you have to get your shadowing hours and all that stuff, or there are opportunities to work in the athletic training room, but I think in some instances those jobs are overshadowed by clinical rotations, or now the integration of master students into those. So I don't know, what is the balance of really
Yeah.
marketing and grabbing those future athletic trainers. And I think that's an issue that we definitely need to look a little bit harder at.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is where like your secondary school AT is going to have such a huge value in the future of the profession, because high school students get to see athletic training in general in clinics if they're injured, or in high schools if they play sports, right? They don't see
Mm-hmm.
them in industry, or they don't see them in these other places as much because they don't bump into them. They may read about that, they may see it on
Yeah.
TV, but they don't actually interact with them that much. So those ATs in those settings are going to be the inspiring ATs that drive somebody to spend the 4-year gap to get to that level, right? So,
Yeah.
but even we can't rely on just those two settings to drive everything for us. So,
No.
I think there's going to be an evolution of what is that bachelor's degree, what is that transition period going to look like?
Yeah.
How do you do it in a way that's economically viable? Like, don't get into a whole bunch of debt, come out with skills that help you. How do you
Mm-hmm.
make that transition? And I think that's probably a question every degree that has shifted up. OT, PT, PA, nurse practitioners, they've all shifted up. They've all had to
Mm-hmm.
deal with that same strain. It's probably our responsibility to look at those other professions and talk with them and figure it out. What did you guys have to do? What did your evolution look like? How does that all relate into the evolution of AT? And I'm sure that there are AT educators and researchers out there doing that. I mean, we didn't come up with this idea. It's not like it's that crazy new, but we
Yeah.
just may not know about it.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I'm excited about is the board of directors approved a task force that I petitioned in June, and it's on the healthcare economics and labor shortage of ATs. And so we will
Okay.
spend this next year, and it's interdisciplinary. So we have participation from different settings, all our alliance partners, as well as representation and insight from APTA and OATA, or OTA and AMA. And so by
Okay.
the end of this year, I'm hoping to have at least a data pack back to the board of directors to say, look, this is how other professions have dealt with healthcare economics and labor shortages. This is how other professions have shifted their masters. This is how other professions are dealing with the COVID restrictions, right? And give it back to them so that then hopefully we have foresight data,
Mm-hmm.
and hindsight data from other professions to be able to say this is our best options going forward. And so
Yeah.
we hope to answer some of the questions that we're posing today.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's your trend that you're excited about as my one of my closing questions. Answered it
Yes.
before I could get to it.
Yes.
And then from the beginning, how would you define an athletic trainer? I'll say 3 words, but I'll give you a few extra because we know it's probably a thicker packet than what we give ourselves credit for.
And this is a good one. I would have to say that it's primary athletic healthcare. And I
Okay.
know that, and healthcare being one word, right? Primary
Yeah.
athletic healthcare. But that will offend some people because there's lots of people that don't think we should be connected to athletics. But I can also say that and I'm going to spend just a second because if I just end on that, there'll be people lynching me for those that don't want to be in athletics anymore, right? But
Make your case. Make your
but
case.
right, but I do think that our domains, like the way that we're trained,
Mm-hmm.
is part of our skill set.
Yeah.
The other part of our skill set is how we are educated, and the way
Mm-hmm.
that we're educated traditionally is an athletic model. And an athletic model is a model that doesn't get in line. It has quick access, strong communication. It's on demand. It's pre-insurance, it's preventative, it's all these different things that athletics creates. So we
Mm-hmm.
learn these crazy awesome skills in a very unique model. So our
Yep.
actual value is not just the domains, but how we're trained. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
if we don't find, it doesn't have to be athletics, but if we don't find another training model that provides the same impact as training in athletics does, our athletic training value will be very restricted to our skills, not how we're trained. And
Yeah.
so to my vision, we should identify situations, whether they're athletics or not athletics, but that promote the fundamental pieces of what an athletic trainer is. And that's
Mm-hmm.
aggressive healthcare, right? That's athletic healthcare is the aggressive healthcare approach. It's an
Yeah.
aggressive, interprofessional, skipped lines, no insurance, preventative, time dependent, embedded healthcare approach. What other
Yeah.
situations provide that? Let's find them and let's do it. But right now, we do
Yeah.
know it's athletics. So that's why I have to say primary, because it's like we're becoming a primary care provider, but primary
Yeah.
athletic healthcare.
No, I think that's a great way of putting it is we're athletes of life, and I think we're good at doing the full spectrum where other professions I think get you back to average health. And we know that when you get injured, usually that means that your 100% isn't good enough. So
Mm-hmm.
we like to, surpass
Yes.
that so that you can do
Mm-hmm.
more. So I think that's a
Yeah.
great way of putting it. And we just have to take the literal meaning of athlete out of it and understand the broader perspective
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all about, and that's why I wrote that article in the news. It's all about how are we defining terms nowadays, right? We
Mm-hmm.
used to, we maybe what was called athletic training in 1950 is now called population health management,
Yep.
or maybe it's called, healthcare economics, or maybe it's called. We need to use today's terminology to redefine what we have that's so valuable. It has to be valuable, or else we wouldn't have 60,000 of us out there, right, in
Yeah.
different countries. So obviously there's value to it, but we need to redefine, relabel, rename the value in a way that allows a current market and our current students and our current healthcare system to recognize it. And that doesn't necessarily mean changing titles, but it does mean changing vocabulary. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, that's probably our biggest need. And that's probably some of our issues and our strife within the profession is we all have different definitions. And I keep going back to that. So until we agree on some basics, um, and the basics in the direction that those basics take us, we're going to struggle to be unified.
So, one last question. So, as many states are updating their practice acts and the definition of their patient um, oversight, this athletic word, I think, is pigeonholing a few people. Do we need to start adding a definition of what, or a better definition of what an athlete is to be more encompassing of this, getting them past average health, like I was saying, or,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the whole scope of
that's
life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like in New Mexico, an athlete is defined by somebody that's working on strength, endurance, speed, power, right? Like it's very broad. So it
Yeah.
encompasses border patrol, police officers, fire, right? It encompasses lots of things that
Mm-hmm.
are not like regular athletes, but they are athletic in nature.
Yeah.
But I do think again that's much like if we focus on the word athlete, on the
Mm-hmm.
negatives of the word athlete, we're missing the positives of the word athlete, right? Everybody in America wants to be treated like the NFL. They all want
Mm-hmm.
on demand access, that level of care, no restrictions, everybody's helping me, done now. So if we say we need to minimize the word athlete, we also need to recognize that we're minimizing the impact that athlete brings to it on the positive side. But what I
Yeah.
do think that we need to do, and unfortunately, practice acts are very, very definition driven, right? I mean, there's like
Yeah.
definitions to every practice act. But I think we need to look at the value of athletic training across the domains, not within the domain. So when we
Mm-hmm.
say we tend to put in practice acts all the different modalities that we can do. And when dry needling comes out, then we have to open our practice act and add dry needling. And
Yeah.
whenever the next thing in 5 years comes out, we're going to have to open our practice act. We should put in like maybe the terminology therapeutic interventions consistent with primary, athletic healthcare. And it's then
Yeah.
we don't have to open it all the time because the definition is broad and it just keeps growing as it changes, right? And so
Yeah.
I think advocating for our full school skill set is way more important than changing the term athlete.
Yeah.
I think athlete at some point is going to be a significant issue. Don't get me wrong. But we also have to recognize that we're bringing athletic healthcare, right? And so it's a
Yeah.
catch-22 that we're bringing the uniqueness that makes us valuable, but we want to take that uniqueness out. And
Mm-hmm.
so but I think we should look at saying these are all the things we do first before we say this is who we do them with.
Yeah. Cool.
So,
Well, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, how can they contact you?
um, so you can find me on LinkedIn, right, and X and things like that. But my email is DAGALLEG at Hotmail. That's an old school email. You're welcome to get me there. If you want to talk, I'm happy to share my cell phone. I love chatting with people just to learn what they're doing and what's happening in the world. I'm all about that. Um, yeah, super easy. I think I'm on most platforms, or you can look up justchange.solutions. That's my website. That was kind of based on the Innovate AT platform we talked about, and there's a way to get a hold of
Perfect.
me there too.
Yeah, and he's super responsive too, so don't be afraid to reach out. He loves talking.
Yes, I do. You
So,
can tell. Yeah.
well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I'm sure we will have you on multiple times to talk about other subjects in athletic training.
Well, it was my pleasure, Shelby. Thank you for reaching out, and I hope you have a great day.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.